My name is Daniel Mercer, and if anyone finds this recording, know that I didn't make it out alive. It all started the night my neighbor, Claire Robinson, left an old box on my porch. She said it came from the attic of the abandoned house at the end of our street, a house nobody dared to step into for years. Inside that box was a doll with tangled red hair and a smile carved too wide across its face. At first, I thought it was nothing more than a relic, a broken toy meant for the trash. But then, I noticed the scratches on its plastic hands, and the way its eyes seemed to follow me whenever I moved. I should have burned it. I should have left the box untouched, because from the moment that doll entered my house, I wasn't living alone anymore. The first time I noticed him was on an ordinary evening, the kind of night when nothing feels out of place until one small detail twists everything into something you can't ignore. I was walking home, the sun had just slipped below the horizon, and the streets felt hollow, drained of life. The only sounds were the crunch of my footsteps on the cracked pavement and the faint hum of the street lamps that flickered as though they were about to die. It was then that I saw it. At first, I thought it was just trash, something discarded and forgotten near the broken fence of the abandoned house. But when I looked closer, I saw that it was a doll. Not just any doll, but one that seemed unnervingly out of place, sitting upright against the wooden boards, as if someone had carefully positioned it there. Its hair was a mess of wiry red strands that caught the weak glow of the streetlight, and its overalls were faded, worn thin with stains I couldn't quite identify. But it was the face that made me stop. The painted smile stretched a little too wide, the kind of grin that felt less like happiness and more like mockery. The eyes, large and round, had a shine to them that seemed alive in the dim light. I stood there longer than I meant to, my chest tightening as I realized the doll's painted blue gaze seemed locked onto me. I tried to shake the feeling off, muttering to myself that it was just a toy, just a stupid, forgotten toy. But as I walked past, I couldn't stop myself from glancing back. That was when my stomach dropped. I could have sworn it had shifted. The way its body leaned, the angle of its head, something was different. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and told myself I was imagining it. Still, the thought followed me like a shadow. That doll was now turned to face me. By the time I reached my house, I was breathing harder than I should have been for a simple walk. I locked the door behind me and tried to laugh at myself, but the laughter died quickly in my throat. All I could see in my head were those painted eyes. It was ridiculous, I told myself, just a trick of the light. But the more I thought about it, the more unsettled I felt. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I tossed and turned, the sheets twisting around me like ropes, every creak of the house sending sharp jolts through my chest. The air felt heavy, and in the silence I thought I heard something faint. It wasn't the sound of wind or pipes or the refrigerator humming. It was softer, sharper, like the faint patter of tiny footsteps moving across the wooden floor. I froze, staring at the ceiling, holding my breath. The sound stopped, but my heart was racing. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining it because of the stupid doll. But then it came again, closer this time, a soft plastic tapping against the boards. My skin prickled with cold. I couldn't move. I just lay there, staring into the dark, waiting for the sound to return. Eventually, silence reclaimed the room. I don't remember when I finally fell asleep, only that it was restless, broken by strange dreams I couldn't remember clearly in the morning. My body ached with exhaustion when I woke, and for a moment, I told myself the entire thing had been a nightmare. But when I opened my bedroom door, my heart nearly stopped. Sitting just outside, as if it had been carefully placed there, was a small object, a child's shoe, dirty, scuffed, far too small for anyone in my house. I stared at it, my throat dry, my mind struggling to understand how it had gotten there. The doll had been outside, against the fence. Now there was this. I told myself it was coincidence, that it meant nothing. but I couldn't ignore the gnawing dread in my gut. Something about that shoe didn't belong. Something about it felt like a message. And for the first time, I realized the thought that had been clawing its way to the surface since the night before. Maybe I hadn't imagined those footsteps at all. The day after finding the shoe, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with my house, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I told myself I wouldn't walk by the abandoned house again, that I would take another route, but my feet betrayed me. Curiosity pulled me there like a string tied tight around my chest. When I reached the broken fence, I stopped dead in my tracks. The doll was gone. The patch of dirt where it had been leaning was bare, and though I should have felt relief, my stomach churned with unease. I wanted it to still be there, because at least then I'd know where it was. The first thing I did that morning was check the closet. My hands shook as I pulled the chair away. I counted to 3 under my breath before swinging the door open, bracing myself for what I would see. The blanket was crumpled on the floor, empty. The doll was gone. I staggered back, my breath catching. My eyes darted over every corner of the closet, half expecting it to leap out at me. But there was nothing. Nothing except for the dark scratches etched into the inside of the door. They were deep, jagged, gouged into the wood with something sharp. My heart stopped when I read the words. "Wanna play?" I couldn't think, couldn't move. The letters seemed to pulse in the dim light, fresh splinters clinging to their edges. My body trembled as though the air itself had turned against me, pressing me down. I slammed the closet door shut again, my legs barely carrying me as I stumbled back into the living room. My mind spun with questions I didn't want to answer. How had it gotten out? Who or what had carved those words? And where was it now? For the rest of the day, I felt like I was being followed by something invisible. Every time I turned a corner, I expected to see that grinning face waiting. Every time I passed a mirror, I swore I saw movement just behind my reflection. The house felt wrong, as if I were no longer alone inside it. I tried to distract myself, television, music, anything, but nothing worked. The sound of static filled my head no matter what I did, and every so often I thought I heard a faint voice hidden inside it, childish and cruel, whispering things I couldn't quite make out. That night, I sat in bed with the lights on, clutching the blanket like armor. I told myself the doll was gone, that it had left, that it couldn't hurt me. But when I finally gathered the courage to close my eyes, sleep dragged me into a shallow, restless darkness. I woke with a jolt, the room swallowed in shadows. My lamp had turned off. The house was silent except for one sound, the faint, deliberate creak of a floorboard just outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, frozen, staring into the darkness. Then came another creak, and another. Slowly, steadily, moving closer. When I finally dared to look at the gap beneath my door, my blood turned to ice. A shadow stretched across the floorboards, small and hunched, and just beside it were 2 tiny feet. The shadow outside my door didn't move for a long time. I sat there frozen, barely breathing, my eyes locked on the thin strip of darkness under the frame. I told myself it wasn't real, that I was half dreaming, that exhaustion was twisting my senses. But then the shadow shifted, and I saw the faintest scrape of movement, the tiny feet adjusting, the weight shifting, as if whatever stood there was waiting for me to make the first move. My pulse thundered. I didn't dare make a sound. Minutes stretched like hours, the silence pressing heavier against my chest until I thought I would suffocate. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the shadow slid away. The floorboards creaked softly, moving back into the hallway, retreating into silence. I stayed in bed until the first light of dawn crept into the room. Only then did I force myself to open the door. The hallway was empty, but the floor beneath the crack told a different story. Tiny smudges of mud led from the stairs to my door, pressed into the wood in messy, uneven patterns. Small footprints, childlike. They circled my door before trailing off toward the end of the hall. I wanted to burn the house down. I wanted to run and never come back. But instead, I found myself cleaning the prints as if pretending they weren't there would erase the nightmare. The mud smeared beneath my rag, and as I wiped it away, I realized the truth was sinking deeper. It wasn't going to stop. The days bled together after that. Time lost meaning. I moved through the house like a prisoner, checking every corner, every shadow. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of movement, a flash of red hair disappearing behind the couch, a plastic hand gripping the edge of a doorway before slipping out of sight. When I convinced myself I was imagining it, something always happened to remind me it was real. The knives were the worst. One morning I went into the kitchen and found the drawer empty, every blade gone. My stomach knotted as I searched the counters, the table, even the sink, but they weren't there. Later that night, I woke to a metallic clink on the floor beside my bed. When I turned my head, I saw one of the knives lying inches from me, its blade reflecting the dim glow of the streetlight outside. I hadn't touched it. I stopped sleeping after that. I tried staying awake, keeping the lights on, drinking coffee until my hands shook. But the exhaustion was its own kind of torture, blurring the edges of reality. Sometimes I thought I heard whispers drifting through the static of the television when it turned on by itself. Sometimes it was my name. Sometimes it was laughter, sharp and childlike, echoing through the house, though I was alone. Then came the footprints again. This time, they were everywhere. Up the walls, across the ceiling above my bed, looping endlessly as though something small had crawled and scurried over every surface in the house. I followed them with trembling eyes, and they always led to the same place. Mirrors. The bathroom mirror, the hallway mirror, my bedroom mirror. Each one had faint smudges, like tiny hands pressed against the glass, as though something inside was trying to get out. I forced myself to keep walking, pretending everything was normal, until my eyes lifted to my own house. That was when the breath caught in my throat. On my porch, resting against the railing, sat the same doll. Its red hair stuck out in tufts, its eyes glittering unnaturally in the daylight, and that same wide grin carved into its face. It hadn't just appeared there, it had followed me. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, staring, my hands trembling at my sides. My first instinct was to run inside, but the idea of passing it, of walking within reach of its little plastic arms, made my skin crawl. After what felt like forever, I darted up the steps, avoiding its gaze as if it were alive. My fingers shook as I fumbled with the key, and when I finally made it through the door, I slammed it shut and locked it. Inside, the air felt different, denser, harder to breathe. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady my racing heart, but my mind refused to calm down. I told myself it was a prank, that someone was messing with me, but deep down I didn't believe it. The locks on my door suddenly felt fragile, thin barriers against something I didn't understand. For hours, I refused to look outside. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at nothing, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional groan of the floorboards settling. Each sound made me jump. Each silence seemed louder than before. The doll was still out there, I told myself. It had to be. The thought of it sitting there, waiting patiently, was almost worse than if it had been gone. As night crept in, the house grew colder. I turned on every light, trying to drive away the shadows, but the brightness only made the corners seem deeper, darker. I wanted to check the porch, to see if it was still there, but my body resisted. Hours dragged by until finally I worked up the courage to pull back the curtain of the front window just enough to peek through. The porch was empty. I let the curtain fall back into place and staggered away from the window, my pulse thundering in my ears. The absence of the doll felt more terrifying than its presence. It could be anywhere now, inside, waiting, hiding. I tried to convince myself that someone had taken it, that the prank was over, but my body wouldn't believe my thoughts. Every nerve screamed that it wasn't over. I forced myself into the living room, trying to relax, trying to breathe. I sat down on the couch, rubbed my eyes, and told myself I was losing it. Just my imagination, nothing more. But when I opened my eyes, my blood ran cold. At the foot of the couch, sitting upright with its legs stretched out like a child watching television, was the doll. Its grin seemed wider than before, its glassy eyes locked directly onto mine. Mud clung to its shoes, and smeared across the front of its overalls was a dark stain. Red, dried, flaking. My throat tightened as I stared at it, unable to move, unable to think. The house was silent, but in my head there was only one thought pounding over and over. It had gotten inside. The locks, the doors, the windows, none of it mattered anymore. The thing I feared wasn't outside waiting to get in. It was already here, and it wasn't going to leave. I couldn't scream. The sound sat heavy in my throat, clawing to escape, but fear held it down. The doll was still there at the foot of the couch, staring, its painted grin gleaming in the dim light. I wanted to believe it hadn't moved, that maybe I had brought it inside and forgotten, that there was some explanation hidden in my memory. But the truth pressed against me like ice. It had placed itself here. My body finally responded, though clumsily, trembling as I snatched a blanket from the couch and tossed it over the doll. The plastic thump it made as it landed only deepened the dread in my chest. Without giving myself time to think, I grabbed the shrouded figure and dragged it across the floor, refusing to look at the outline beneath the fabric. The weight was wrong. It felt too heavy for a toy, too solid, as if something more was inside. I shoved it into the hall closet, slammed the door, and pushed a chair against the handle. I stood there, frozen, staring at the thin wooden door as if it were the only thing between me and something unspeakable. My heart hammered in my ears. I told myself it was over, that I'd locked it away, that I could breathe again. But even as I repeated the words, I knew they were lies. Every sound in the house seemed sharper now. The tick of the clock echoed like a drum. The hum of the lights buzzed against my skull. And beneath it all, I thought I heard something faint, a scratching, soft but steady, coming from the closet door. My stomach knotted as I pressed my hands against my ears, refusing to hear it. I walked to my bedroom, closed the door, and tried to force myself into sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. Shadows shifted against the walls, the silence broken now and then by what I swore were faint, high-pitched giggles. I stared at the ceiling until dawn bled into the room. The exhaustion clung to my bones, but fear kept me wired, trembling. I told myself not to look, not to give it the satisfaction. But curiosity is a cruel thing. Late one night, I stood in front of the mirror in my room, my reflection pale and hollow-eyed, my body trembling from lack of rest. For a moment, there was nothing but me staring back. Then, slowly, movement flickered at the corner of the reflection. A small figure climbing onto my dresser behind me, red hair wild, plastic face gleaming. I turned, heart hammering, and there it was. The doll, perched on the dresser like a child playing pretend. Its painted grin seemed stretched wider now, twisted into something mocking. But my eyes locked on its hand, because clutched in its tiny plastic fingers was one of the kitchen knives, the blade pointed downward as if ready to plunge. I couldn't move. The air around me froze, and all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. For the first time, I understood it wasn't just playing with me. It was preparing, and this time, it wasn't going to hide again. I don't remember how long I stood frozen in front of that dresser, staring at the knife glinting in the doll's hand. The silence between us was unbearable, a heavy weight pressing against my chest until my lungs screamed for air. Every instinct begged me to run, but the thought of turning my back on it was worse than standing still. I could almost feel those glassy eyes digging into me, studying me, waiting. Finally, my legs obeyed. I stumbled backward, never letting my gaze slip away from its face, and bolted out of the room. The moment my feet hit the hallway, I slammed the door shut and shoved a chair under the knob. It wouldn't stop it, I knew that, but I needed some illusion of control, something to keep me from falling apart. My heart was hammering so hard it felt like it might burst. I told myself I had to leave, that staying in the house meant certain death. My keys were by the front door, and for once I didn't care what waited outside. I just needed to escape. I grabbed them with shaking hands, flung the door open, and ran into the night. The air was cold, sharp against my skin, but I hardly felt it. Relief surged through me as I stepped into the open street, convinced for a moment that I had outsmarted it. But then my eyes adjusted to the dim light of the flickering street lamp, and I froze where I stood. They were waiting. Dozens of dolls lined the street in both directions, identical faces grinning under the pale glow, their tiny plastic bodies sitting upright like soldiers on watch. Each one clutched something, a rusted knife, a shard of glass, a jagged piece of metal. The sight knocked the air out of me. My mind screamed at me to run, but where could I go? The street was filled with them, their lifeless eyes fixed on me in perfect silence. I backed up slowly, step by trembling step, until I was inside the doorway again. The moment I closed the door, the house no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a coffin. I locked it out of instinct, though I knew locks meant nothing anymore. They had already proven that. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely, plunging me into darkness. I clutched the keys so tightly they dug into my skin, trying to use the pain to ground myself. But then I heard it, the faint scraping sound of tiny shoes against the floor. Not just one pair, but many, moving slowly through the rooms, circling, closing in. I couldn't breathe. The sound was everywhere, coming from the ceiling, the walls, the stairs. I backed into the hallway, the walls pressing closer with each step, until I found myself at the closet door, the same one I had once shoved the doll into. My body moved on instinct, pulling it open and slipping inside, slamming it shut behind me. I crouched in the dark, curling into myself, clutching the keys like a weapon even though they were useless. The scratching started almost immediately. Nails, or maybe plastic fingers, dragging along the outside of the closet door. The sound grew louder, sharper, until it felt like they were carving directly into my skull. I pressed my palms against my ears, rocking back and forth, whispering that it wasn't real. But the sound didn't stop. And then I heard it. A voice. High-pitched, childlike, dripping with mockery. It wasn't muffled through the door. It was inside with me. "You'll never get rid of me." The words froze me to the spot. My body refused to move. My throat refused to scream. Slowly, with every ounce of dread pulling at me, I opened my eyes. Two small, glowing blue eyes stared back at me from the dark, inches away. My breath caught, my chest locked, but I couldn't look away. The grin widened, sharper than before, and I realized with horrifying clarity that the doll hadn't just followed me into the closet. I had walked into its hiding place, trapping myself inside with it. The scratching outside stopped. The house fell silent. The only sound left was a faint laugh, close enough that I felt its breath against my ear. And then the door of the closet slammed shut from the inside.